Well, welcome back, everybody. We hope you enjoyed the lunch. Let's start with the afternoon session. We still have 2 keynotes and a round table, and we still have to save some gas for the dinner and the party tonight. Are you ready for the party tonight? Okay. Our next guest is the co-founder and the CEO of Mobile Commons, the leading provider of mobile technology for civic engagement. Mobile Commons serves non-profit organizations, advocacy groups, government agencies, healthcare providers, and businesses. Let's listen to this interesting keynote. Please, a warm welcome to Jed Alpert.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd really like to thank everyone at Nonick. This has been an incredible conference, and it's probably the most fun I've had at one ever. First, I'd like to apologize for coming here and asking you to listen to me in English, and I would ask you to indulge me, and if I haven't made myself understood or clear in any way, I apologize for that, and interrupt me and ask me to repeat myself or make it more clear, or let me know that my point is completely wrong. But bear with me. I've been told I speak too fast, so I will try not to. First of all, conferences like this are really great reminders. Wait, I have slides. I got to figure out how to get them up. Presentation, sorry. Here, I think I got it.
Did you find it?
Yeah, this is it. So conferences like this one are great reminders of really the impact that digital media is having everywhere. And one thing I hear at a lot of conferences is that it's a bad idea to preach to the converted. You're just preaching to the converted is the ultimate put down with which to speedily dismiss an idea. But have you ever met a preacher who didn't preach to the converted? Isn't that really what preaching is all about? In fact, it's great to preach to the converted. The wonderful thing about speaking to a large network of people who believe in the same thing you do is that they're inclined to listen. And that means you can motivate them to act. It's called motivating your base. The right reminder at the right time can make all the difference between a forgotten impulse and a completed action. At Mobile Commons, excuse me, where I work, we want our customers to be like a mega church. We enable our customers to preach to as many of the converted as they possibly can. We focus on helping companies, nonprofits, and government agencies communicate with supporters at a big scale, hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and then motivating those people to take actions. We work with groups around the world ranging from South American departments of health to major brands in many countries to the Obama campaign in the United States. Our customers include all types of brands, campaigns, and governments. And those actions that the customers are trying to get people to take can be anything from getting a flu shot to redeeming a coupon to voting for a president. Preaching to the converted creates missionaries who will go out and change the world. Today I want to talk about how we can preach to the converted more effectively. The wonderful thing about mobile media is that you can see the results in real time and act in those results instantly. Our customers can see every text message sent, every phone call made, and every web link clicked. You can see how one user joined the campaign, how long they spent on the phone with the White House, or how likely it is that someone will take an action. That's given us a good book's worth of hard facts about what works and, probably more importantly, what doesn't. I want to look at mobile media from the perspective of one of the biggest global events, the recent revolutions across the Middle East. And I'm going to ask the obvious question on every observer's mind. What can the Middle East protesters learn from Martha Stewart? And I'm informed, if you don't know who Martha Stewart is, it's a lot like, and there's no way I'm going to be close in pronouncing this, so I apologize in advance. Argunano? Is that right? Is that a person named Argunano? Okay, that person. And then I'm going to go look at the Obama campaign, at what the Obama campaign can learn from both of them. and most significantly, how all that can help anyone who's trying to build a pulpit of their own, particularly doing that using mobile technology. So what can the Arab street learn from Martha Stewart? Well, let me back up for a second. Right after the recent revolutions in February, the media gave us two competing, I should say the mainstream media gave us two competing narratives. The first narrative was that we were witnessing the first ever Facebook revolution. In fact, it seemed unimaginable based on, on these reports that there could have been a revolution at any time ever without Twitter or Facebook. The protests across Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya had been created on Facebook. They'd been nurtured on Facebook. In fact, nobody in Egypt would have been able to find Tahrir Square without Mark Zuckerberg personally giving them directions. The competing story was Facebook and other new technologies had nothing to do with these protests. According to this narrative, digital media was just another piece of background technology. Like media often does, it has become an artificially binary debate. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Of course, Egyptian protesters, the infrastructure of the Egyptian protester existed well before Facebook had been invented. It's just not that fun for reporters to write about a 70-year-old Egyptian union. But the activists in Egypt used Facebook and other technologies to help them build scale fast. They were able to communicate with vast numbers of people much more quickly by building a sympathetic online community. Conversely, much of the core planning and organizing was done through classic person-to-person communication. Small groups of people texted each other information and logistics. Facebook was being monitored by the government, and anyway, text messaging was more actionable, immediate, and personal. Excuse me for 1 second. The heart of the protests, of course, came from the protesters themselves and all the people. But they used multiple methods of communication, including vast numbers of digital communication, to coordinate and accelerate their movements. Small group communicating via text message is personal, but it doesn't really give you scale in a way that's actionable. And on the other hand, Facebook pages provide scale, but it's easy to monitor and it's really not particularly personal. Combining those obviously worked well for the Arab protesters. The results speak for themselves. But if Martha Stewart had been in charge, things could have gone better, and of course, with impeccably matched colors. Thank you. You got one laugh. The challenge from a revolution to a consumer brand is, how do you spread your message broadly enough to reach most supporters and also keep it personal enough to move them to action? How do you approach the largest audience and still inspire every person? When Martha Stewart was building her mobile list, the question she faced was, what is a big issue that a large number of Martha Stewart customers are passionate about? And like many people, the answer was food. Martha Stewart's customers wanted that age-old question, what should I make for dinner tonight? And I think she asked the question somewhat differently than the way Zach asked that question, but that, like we know, is something that can really engage people. But the problem with a campaign like that is, while everyone wants to know what to make for dinner, nobody can agree about what they like. I might want to make chorizo. You might want to make something with jamon. And if you can believe it, some people might want something without pork. The solution was the Dinner Tonight campaign. Across all her media, Martha Stewart encouraged people to text in the word dinner, and they would receive a recipe suggestion every day at around 3 o'clock saying, would you like chicken cacciatore or whatever it was, different one on a different day. The genius of the campaign was the next step, where if someone responded that they were interested in that particular meal, they'd reply with the word cook, and they would be emailed they would receive an email with the recipe, a text message with the shopping list, and they would then receive a follow-on coupon for one of the items that they could get a discount on at the grocery store. The Dinner Tonight campaign gave general information to a wide audience and offered some specific steps and offers to those who wanted to learn more, people who requested to know more. They found that each day, more than 20% of the users asked for the day's recipes. And the incredible thing was, it was a different 20% all the time. And of course, Martha Stewart ends up with a list of her loyal customers who are now actively engaged with her, people she knows are invested in her brand, who she can call upon again and again in the future to take actions or participate or ask questions of. Now, asking for a dinner recipe is obviously a little bit less intense than turning out to protest the government. Creating one centralized list might have been outside the scope of the grassroots movement entire square. But the broader point is that any effective campaign needs to combine broad reach with the personal and the local. It needs to appeal to the neighborhood and the country. Targeted, segmented messaging, particularly mobile messaging, is really revolutionizing our ability to do that. Of course, Martha Stewart can learn a lot from the protesters. The way in which the protesters combined media allowed them to have the impact that they did. Mobile messages allow you to reach a huge number of people with the personalization of a one-to-one conversation, but mobile works best, always, when it's integrated with a broader campaign. The protesters mix Facebook with text messages, Skype calls, and of course they used the ultimate medium, which was widespread grassroots action, not to mention the actual protests themselves. Or as a marketer might call it, event-based interactive outdoor. Mobile messaging allows you to reach a huge number of people, but it is only really one part, and that it's very, very important that people understand you don't really learn about anything from mobile. It activates you. No one originated an action or learned about mobile or learned about a campaign because it existed on mobile first. It's always and universally part of a larger media campaign, and that media campaign can be from anywhere. As an example, our partner, the Reform Immigration for America movement, is a perfect example of how you use mobile in concert with other media. And putting all of that together, you can create game-changing advocacy. As many of you know, the United States has been racked recently by the debate over immigration reform. Reform Immigration for America is the largest and most effective organization devoted to this cause. They were trying to organize in support of immigrant rights, but they were facing a problem. Their community organizers were struggling to find and mobilize the vast number of individual supporters who are often non-English speakers, people with little access to the internet, and from disparate communities. Too often, Reform Immigration for America knew they had the converts. They knew they had the people they could take action. They just didn't have the right way to get them into the church and to preach to them. Too often, technology reaches those who are very easy to reach. Reform Immigration for America needed to reach the hard to reach. That's where they knew their best supporters were and the people most engaged in the issue. So perhaps the problem is not really is preaching to the easy to reach, not preaching to the converted. And I would say that with mobile, throughout the world, you have an opportunity at scale to reach people who are very hard to reach and have been excluded from the political process or other kinds of process, not because of lack of interest or lack of wanting to participate, but because of their circumstance are often very difficult to reach. So Reform Immigration for America began to incorporate mobile calls to action in every form of media, from their website to their radio campaigns, from billboards to T-shirts. They announced text justice to join the mobile conversation. And because a large portion of Reform Immigration's audience was Latino, they told Spanish speakers they could text in Justicia to join a list in Spanish. This makes it even more particularly embarrassing that I do not speak Spanish. Providing English speakers with English messages and Spanish speakers with Spanish messages may seem simple, but it's never been something that you could reliably guarantee. And that was just the first way in which Reform Immigration for America was personalizing their outreach. In a few months, they had built a list of tens of thousands of potential activists. They then urged that group to build the list even further by asking friends to join. Reform Immigration can now immediately contact its supporters on the device they use most, and even more importantly, they can make it easy and personal for them to take actions. For example, when Reform Immigration wanted to drive congressional support of the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act is a law that would allow people who came over here as young children to stay if they had become successful students and had not been convicted of a crime. Something that just seems so incredibly obvious. It says a little bit politically about where the United States is, and which has not yet passed, but I think will next year. But to stay here if they met certain qualifications, like getting into college. What they did is they sent a text message to their list, the hundreds of thousands of people, that automatically triggered a phone call to their particular congressional representative, asking that representative to vote for the DREAM Act. What they did was they spurred local action on a national scale with a tremendous amount of efficiency. By making it simple for their supporters to take concrete actions, the Reform Immigration's list has grown to hundreds of thousands of people who take millions of actions. And it's not just calls. They've used the list to organize rallies, bus trips, to petition the president, and to do all other kinds of action. And one interesting thing they and we've learned is that there are lots of different types of activists and actions, just like there's lots of different types of people. Let me explain. A few years ago, Congressman Luis Gutierrez, held a national conference call in support of rolling out an immigration reform bill. To build support and engage its base, Reform Immigration asked its users to host listening parties where groups could gather and listen in on the conference call, turning a relatively passive event into a community activity. Because Reform Immigration thought that hosting a party was a big ask and that that was something they should only ask their most active supporters, they at first only asked the supporters who had taken the most actions previously, the most phone calls, the most other kinds of engagements. They figured that someone who had never made a phone call probably wouldn't want people to come into their home. But when they broadened the ask to the entire list, they learned that it's completely different. It wasn't that it was a big ask, it was a different action. Different people were just interested in different actions. We have a tendency to think that there's a linear scale of engagement. People go from being unengaged to doing things that are relatively easy, like sending a text message or making a phone call, to things that are hard, like throwing a party in your house. But actually, there are different kinds of people. The kinds of things that appeal to one person won't appeal to another, and vice versa. Being able to correlate new actions against past actions lets Reform Immigration gain new insights into its customer base and begin to understand, or I should say its constituent base, and begins to understand who's likely to do what, who they can call in for what, who's interested in what, and really begin to learn from them. And this is just that particular campaign, in just 1 week, they set up over 1,000 house parties attended by over 60,000 people. Some of the parties were in English, some of them in Spanish, some were mixed, and all of that was completely coordinated over the mobile phone using texting, having people text in their zip code or their address to find out where the nearest party was, all put together in a week. Here's just a great example of digital connections being used to build on-the-ground, long-term, in-person relationships. And it's really technology in service of the organizer on the ground that is the big win. And I also believe one of the themes of this conference, which is that it's really about the personal relationship you can make using technology and not technology for technology itself. Looking forward, it's that kind of organizing that will supercharge the Obama campaign. An enormous apparatus like the Obama campaign has extensive outreach. They have national television ads. They have tens of thousands of volunteers on the ground. They have a Facebook page, a Twitter page. They might even have a MySpace page. So what can mobile add to that? With such a giant machine, it's easy for the individual activist to feel lost. But a CRM, and CRM, by CRM I mean a customer relations or constituent relations database, that's really sort of an extensive database that allows you to record all the information about what your users have done, what actions they've taken, what things they're most interested in. And it's easy with the CRM, and specifically a mobile CRM, you can get rapid insight into who the people you're preaching to are and what they've done in the past, what their interests are, and what really matters to them. Also, the campaign can activate the hard to reach, people who are underserved by the internet, people who are not available everywhere, people who are on the move, people who don't have a reliable email address, but people who are naturally inclined to support this particular campaign, those hard to reach people. And we can find them wherever they are, and they can become part of the campaign in that way. By segmenting a multi-million person list and creating precise, targeted messaging, the Obama campaign can spur the kind of action that can be the difference in a close presidential race. although at this point it's really anyone's guess who would be the other side of that particular race. I opened my presentation by talking about how vital it is to be able to preach to the converted. Being able to assemble your supporters and engage them in a meaningful way is the best way to create real action. But the next step is to let the converted preach back to you. The most effective way to speak to someone is if you're listening to them as well. Most businesses have always been one-to-one with their most important customers. Managers of wonderful restaurants, for example, made it their business to know top guests personally, what they liked, what they didn't like, what foods would kill them, and what wines they were partial to. In the past, such personalization was time-consuming and expensive, and you could only provide it to a small number of your customers or supporters. But mobile-based customer relation systems make it possible to maintain that degree of knowledge, flexibility, and intimacy and effectiveness with every customer or constituent, and to create high-value relationships that can last potentially forever. By using mobile media and tracking, you can fine-tune more than just outreach. You can feed that information back into all your media and across all your platforms. For the first time, you can be one-to-one with every one of your constituents and customers. Thanks. Questions? Anyone?
Any question? No one? Okay, we have one.
Hey, so what are your thoughts on QR codes?
QR codes?
Yeah, as it relates to this kind of activism and just in general.
Well, QR codes don't really engage people because they fall short of being what we would call an opt-in path. So what a QR code does is direct someone to a particular website, but then it's a fault of the QR code reader, but then doesn't sort of opt them in to join a campaign. It requires more work. In testing that we've done, when there's a QR code and side by side there's a short code with a keyword, the difference in the response difference is more than 100 times more people will, and I don't know if this is true in every country. We've only done this in the United States and a little bit in the UK. It's about 100 times to 200 times more likely to take the action and become engaged than the QR code. So I don't. I think at some point people will have a sort of higher understanding and the QR code system will work better. And there are a few things that it works pretty well for, like getting very specific information. But by and large, as an engagement tool, it's not particularly effective. Good question.
Well, okay, you are making me crazy from one side to another.
I just would really like if someone over there would ask a question next. I don't really care what it is.
So with examples like Obama and Martha Stewart, they're obviously large scale and large budgets. What if anything, of those learnings can be applied to smaller scale things, such as local activism?
Well, in a way, first of all, a lot of these lessons apply to any kind of activism, but one of the kind of key learnings always is find a way to communicate with whoever wants to be communicated with you. And you don't necessarily have to use a CRM or anything like that, particularly for small groups, but make sure you're getting everyone's email. Make sure that you're updating them. Make sure you're listening to what their responses are. If you send out a message and a bunch of people opt out of your campaign, try and figure out why. Go see one of those people and really, really understand that even at small scale, you can accomplish a lot by communicating very efficiently with people and by listening to what comes back and recording that and understanding who is not available Thursday night to host a meeting. So you don't ask them 5 times. Understand who's willing to drive someone somewhere. Who has a car, who has a friend abroad, all of these kinds of things are what you see over and over is that people have to learn this over and over, when you can really take very simple tools that are often free, and just begin to look at the data, look at where your members are coming from, look at what efforts, particularly for small organizations who have very limited ability to take efforts and to do anything, look at what works best and what's most effective, and focus your efforts on that. I make one point, which is listening to the people who are your constituents is something that NGOs and nonprofits have excelled at way ahead of businesses. And I believe this is because NGOs and nonprofits have had an amazing, a very amazing challenge ahead of them. They get people to give their time and money in exchange for nothing but the communications you send them. So they really need to know what people think, who they can rely on, how many messages it takes, all these kinds of things. And it's interesting, there's not that many areas in technology where NGOs are substantially ahead of business, but this is definitely one of them, where really we built our platform for nonprofits originally, and political campaigns and civic engagement, and it wasn't until later that businesses started calling up and say, hey, we kind of like to do that too.
Any other questions from the other side? I will expect one.
An urgent question that requires running.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks.
so much. Don't.
Oh.
For the art.
Thank you.
Very nice.
I agree.